All right, so for today, if you want to have the first listening assignment pulled up, we're probably going to finish that listening assignment today. We'll get through everything that's on that listening assignment today. And if you also haven't completed the multiple choice assignments, you can go ahead and pull those up as well and be going through those as we go through them. I certainly don't mind you doing those during class. In fact, I encourage you to do that. Save yourself a little bit of time.
That's something you want to try to like maintain video. That's something you last night. And I was like, I'm not focusing on revenge. That's the thing that's due that night.
That's a smart thing to do. Okay, so just as a reminder, you do have 3 assignments to do tomorrow night. The first 2 multiple choice assignments and the first listening assignment, and we should be able to get through those in class today. So we talked about the Concerto Grosso on Tuesday, which is a form that was popular during this time period, during the Baroque era, kind of a predecessor to the classical concerto or the classical symphony. Today I want to start with another form that was extremely popular during this time period called the fugue. All right, so the fugue is a type of composition. So I've had a lot of questions on the assignments when I ask what is the type of composition or what type of composition is this. The answers I'm looking for there is it a fugue? Is it a concerto grosso? Is it a symphony? Is it an opera? That's what I'm looking for with those. And in some cases, the type of composition and the form are the same. So the fugue is a type of composition, but it is also a form. So the Bach's Little Fugue in G minor that we're going to listen to, it is a fugue as the type of composition, and it is also in the fugue form. All right, so that gives you a little bit of a hint there at a couple of those answers. So the fugue is a cornerstone of Baroque music. It's one of the most exemplary examples of Baroque music. It's a type of music that was, really boomed in the Baroque era, and J.S. Bach was a master of the fugue. When we get to him on Tuesday, we'll talk about all of the fugues that he wrote. He wrote a whole bunch of them. And the fugue is a form that continues through today. There are still composers that are including fugues within their pieces of music. They were very popular still in the classical era and in the Romantic era. You would have a part of a symphony might take on the form of a fugue. And in the Baroque era, there were several fugues that were just written as standalone pieces. And we're going to listen to one of them here in just a second. So this is a polyphonic composition. It is kind of the height of polyphony. There's a lot of melodies that are all happening at the same time here. And the whole thing is based off of one main theme, which we call the subject. Okay, and on the listening guide, I ask you about that. There's what the main theme of the piece is called, and in a fugue, that is called the subject. The subject starts the piece. Okay, fugues can be both vocal or instrumental. Most of the fugues that we have today are instrumental, but there are some vocal fugues out there as well. And the example that we're going to listen to, the Bach Little Fugue in G minor, is an instrumental one that is written for organ. And it starts with a subject that sounds like this. And it goes on from there. So that is the subject or the main theme of the fugue. And then all of the other voices join that fugue in imitation. So the first voice, the first line on the organ plays that, and then it moves on to what's called the counter subject when the alto voice or a slightly lower voice comes in with the subject. And then the tenor voice comes in with the subject, and the bass voice comes in with the subject, while the other voices move on to other things. And eventually you end up with 4 different voices all moving with this complex polyphony. And there's a lot of stuff going on. It gets very complex. And some of Bach's fugues get so complex that they're almost difficult to listen to. They can be a little bit dissonant as everything is clashing together, especially if you're listening to it on an organ, on these huge pipe organs where you have multiple octaves being played at the same time. They can get to be a little bit difficult, a little bit intense in there. So a couple of other terms that I want you to know about these fugues having to do with fugues. There's a term called stretto, which is going to be used a lot, not just in fugues, but also in symphonies and sonatas and other forms that are going to come around. And that basically is where the main theme is interrupted before it gets to finish the main theme. So there's some times in the piece where you'll hear that main theme, bum, 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 and then before it actually finishes its theme, another voice jumps in with the main theme again, kind of interrupting it. And that's what stretto is. We also have a term called pedal point, which means that there's going to be a single note that's being held while there's a bunch of other stuff happening on top of it. So you have one bass note and then multiple harmonic progressions happening over the top of it. You have a chord progression that may not really be related to that one note that's being held. And we call that pedal point because a lot of fugues were written for organ by J.S. Bach, because that's what he played. And you had, on an organ, you actually have pedals down below that are set up just like a keyboard that the organist plays with their feet. And when a pedal point would happen, they would just hold one of those pedals down while they play the other stuff with their hands. Okay? So we're going to listen to an example of a fugue. This is Bach's Little Fugue in G minor. Here we go. Which was written in the first decade of the 18th century, written around 1709. And we call this the Little Fugue in G minor because Bach actually wrote two fugues in G minor. One of them was fairly short. This one's a little over, it's almost 4 minutes long. And then he wrote another one that's closer to 15 minutes long. And that one's the Great Fugue in G minor. So this is the Little Fugue in G minor. As I said, originally written for organ, so Bach would have performed this in a church on the organ as probably a prelude or something like that, or a postlude. And as I said, it starts with a subject, which is the main theme, and then when the alto voice takes over the subject, the main theme moves on to what's called the counter subject. So the second half of that theme is called the counter subject there. All right, and the video I picked for us to watch and listen to for this, I picked because it's an animated video where you can kind of follow the music. You've probably seen these animated music videos before, and it's really cool with a fugue because you can actually follow each individual line with the different colors as they go along. So you have, even though it's all being played on the organ, we still consider the different lines to be acting as different voices: soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So the first melody that comes in green is the soprano voice, and that's going to start it off for us. And then we'll have a line that comes in orange, and that's the alto voice. And then a pink set of notes is going to be the tenor voice, and then the bass voice is going to be in purple. So as you're watching this, I want you to keep in mind, number one, that this would be played by one person, and you can find live performances of it on YouTube if you want to watch an organist play this thing. And also, the purple notes would actually be played by the organist's feet. So everything above is being played with their hands, and then the purple line is actually being played with their feet. It is pretty extraordinary to watch an organist do this. While I mean, it's crazy. They've got both hands going and both feet going, all playing different notes. You know, we think of drummers as being incredible because all the different stuff they can do with their hands, but I think organists probably win whenever it comes to that. All right, so I'm going to start it here, and for those of you in class, I'm going to turn off the lights so you can see the colors a little brighter. So this is our subject. And now it moves to the alto voice. purple is the bass voice with the subject again. Here's an example of pedal point. So pretty intense, right? There's a lot of stuff going on there. You may have also noticed that, like the short basso continuo example I played the other day, even though this piece is in G minor, it ends on a G major chord. In the Baroque era, you didn't often end with a minor chord. You would want to end with that major chord there. So that is the fugue, and like I said, Bach wrote a whole bunch of them, and we'll study more of them later on as we go throughout the Baroque era. So Lawson asked why they ended with major chords. It was just kind of the sensibility of the Baroque era. They didn't want to end pieces with minor chords most of the time, just because I guess they wanted to leave the audience with a more uplifted feeling. I personally disagree with it. You know, one of the piece that we studied yesterday, even though the whole thing was in G minor, at the end of it, you get this. Where it closes on a major chord. And I guess that was just to make it sound more uplifting. I personally would prefer for it to do something like this. Because I like the minor feel at the end of it, but I'm also not a Baroque composer. That just wasn't the standard for the time. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the opera. So the opera is invented in the Baroque era. It originally comes out of Italy and takes over Europe very quickly. The Italian opera becomes extremely popular during the Baroque era. So you've probably heard of opera before. You've at least heard the term before because we just talked about it with our daily listening. So an opera is a drama that is sung, that's performed with music. So instead of having text like a play or dialogue like a play, all of the dialogue is sung. And there's also usually an orchestral accompaniment of some kind there. The text of an opera is called the libretto, and a lot of times the libretto is actually written by somebody else. So you have the composer who writes the music and the librettist who writes the libretto. So if I ask you, if we're studying a piece of opera and I ask you who the librettist is, I'm looking for the person that wrote the lyrics, that wrote the words. Okay. So the difference between an opera and a musical, I tend to get this question a lot because they are pretty similar. Technically, an opera does not have any spoken dialogue. Okay, the entire opera is sung. In a musical, you have dialogue that is then interjected with songs. So it's a play with songs inserted into it. What's interesting is that there's a lot of Broadway musicals today that are actually closer to being opera than being musicals, but I guess because they're in the more pop style, we tend to call them musicals instead. One of the big examples of that is Hamilton, which is huge now, of course, since they released it on Disney Plus this summer. Everybody has seen. Yeah, everybody's seen Hamilton. It's hugely popular. Hamilton is actually pretty close to being an opera. There is very little dialogue in that play. Almost everything is either rapped or sung. So I would consider Hamilton to be a modern hip hop opera. Or R&B or urban, whatever you want to call it. Jesus Christ Superstar is the same way. If you've ever seen that, it is primarily sung. There's very little spoken dialogue there. Okay, but we're talking about Baroque opera, which is a little bit different. So opera can be serious, or it can be comic, or it can be a combination. It's not always going to be a tragedy if it's serious, but that is pretty popular, especially in the Baroque era. The melancholy was very popular. You think of Shakespeare's plays and things like Romeo and Juliet that are just super tragic, and that was pretty common in the Baroque era for opera as well. But there also are a lot of comic operas, or some that have elements of both. Mozart's operas tended to be both comic and serious. He tended to kind of go back and forth and try to not make it so serious by adding a little bit of comedic relief in there. So within an opera, we have two primary types of solo songs that are performed, and we're going to listen to an example of each of these. The first one is a recitative, and a recitative is as close to spoken dialogue as you get in an opera. So this is usually some kind of narration. It's basically for the benefit of the audience, presenting the plot material, telling us what's going on. And a recitative is supposed to imitate the sound of speech, but still be very musical, right? And we'll listen to an example to kind of show you what I'm talking about there. It tends to be very free-flowing. It doesn't always have a strict meter or rhythm to it. It's almost like a soliloquy that a play would include, where the actor might be talking about their inner thoughts, but it's really for the benefit of the audience to kind of know what's going on there. And then you have the aria, which is usually kind of the showcase song for the individual performers, for the singers. Every opera is going to have different parts which kind of have the main characters of the different voice types. You usually have a main soprano and a main alto or mezzo soprano and a main tenor and a main bass within an opera. And each of those voices will typically get their own aria to kind of show off their virtuosity. It's their big moment to shine. And most of the most famous pieces from operas are the arias. And if you go to a vocalist senior recital, you're probably going to hear them perform an aria of some kind from an opera as their kind of solo feature song. Some other types of songs that we here in opera are duets, trio, quartets, quintets, different ensemble pieces, which basically means you have multiple actors that are all singing, multiple singers that are singing a song, and we call that an ensemble piece. So you've got the recitatives and the arias, which are the solos, and then you have the ensemble pieces, which are the full group singing. Okay. The chorus is basically the extras from the for an opera. It's the crowds of people, the other part of the cast that is not the main characters. So if you're in a town hall or something, you have the main characters, but then the other people scattered around the town are going to be the chorus. And they work kind of like a Greek chorus did sometimes. They'll present the voice of the narration sometimes, or they'll give some plot points to kind of push the story along. And then, of course, we have the conductor, who is the music director. The ensemble usually, the instrumental orchestra is usually in what's called a pit, an orchestra pit, which is going to be sunk down at the front of the stage. If you watched Hamilton on Disney Plus, you could actually see down at the front of the stage there was a square, and sometimes you could see Alex Lackamore's head sticking out of it. So the musicians were actually under the stage for that performance in what's called the orchestra pit. Sometimes they're out in front of the stage, sometimes they're actually underneath the stage, depending on the theater. Most modern theaters, they're either underneath the stage, or they actually have the orchestra pit backstage somewhere, and they just have the music piped in. They have them all mic'd up and piped in that way. If you go to the Arkansas Repertory Theater, their pit is actually in the back, and they kind of have their own room with monitors so that they can see and hear what's going on the stage. And the conductor is basically the guy that conducts the music there. A couple of roles that are important, the basso buffo and the basso profundo. I'm not going to get into those too much. I took those questions off of the test. But more importantly, we have in an opera a prelude or an overture, as it's sometimes called. And that overture is what really introduces the piece of music, introduces the opera. It is a standalone piece of music that served in the classical era as kind of the signal that we're about to start. The orchestra starts the overture, and that's kind of your last chance to get into your seats and get ready for the opera to start. And a lot of times that overture is made up of themes that you're going to hear throughout the piece. So you'll hear all of the different parts and sections from that. So a lot of times those overtures are now performed as standalone works for orchestra. So you'll see, you might go to the Arkansas Symphony, and they might play the overture from Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, which is a very, very popular overture to be performed. So if you hear that term, a prelude or an overture, that's what they're talking about there. Okay. So let's talk about Claudio Monteverdi. He is an Italian composer from the early Baroque, who is responsible for writing the first great Italian opera, which is called Orfeo, right? And it's the story of Orpheus. So he worked at St. Mark's in Venice, which we talked about at the end of the Renaissance. There was the place where Gabrielli worked as well. So he spent 30 years working as a church musician, but then he also was writing secular music for the aristocracy. He was getting paid very well by rich people to write these operas and other secular pieces. So he used a lot of dissonances within his music, which create that kind of tension, and he used that a lot more freely than other composers had before him, and he helped to kind of shape the sound of the Baroque orchestra. Now, while we know that Monteverdi was a major composer during this time, very, very popular, we know that he wrote 12 operas that were performed in Venice. Only 3 of them still exist. We only actually have 3 of those left over, and Orfeo is the most popular of those that is still performed pretty regularly. So this is one of the first examples of opera that we know of still today. So we're going to listen to Tu sei morta from Orfeo. This is an opera recitative. So when I ask you what type of work this is, it is an opera recitative. So this is sung by Orpheus. So if you don't know the story of Orpheus, Orpheus is this great performer. He has a lute or a harp, a lyre that he performs on. Has a beautiful voice, and he can influence. Hang on just a second. He can influence other people through his beautiful music, and the gods decide that he has gotten basically too arrogant and cocky, so they kill his wife, Eurydice. And so he decides, Orpheus realizes that he's done something terrible and it's his fault that she's dead. So he decides to go into hell and talk to Hades. Is that the guy's name, right? And try to convince him to let his wife go. So Hades says, yes, if you trust me, if you trust that she is following you, you can exit out of hell and she'll be behind you. But if you turn around to see if she's following you, you'll lose her forever. So he sends him on his way, and of course, because it's a tragedy, Orpheus decides halfway through there he doesn't believe that she's actually following him, so he turns around. It turns out she was following him, but because he turned around to look, she is lost forever. So very tragic piece of music. Yes.
It's also it's also started told in another modern musical, Hadestown.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, I heard that on TikTok. It's basically the same story that you were just telling me.
Yeah. So this piece is when Orpheus first learns that his wife has died, and it's kind of his fault. And this is him deciding that he's going to go and win her back. He's going to go get her back. So I want you to listen to the words here. This uses a lot of word painting. So for instance, on the word sole, which means the sky, it goes up very high there. And you can really kind of hear the tragedy. But again, it's a recitative, so it doesn't have a strict rhythm to it. It's kind of slow moving, and you can almost hear him talking to himself and deciding what he's going to do here. And I think YouTube, yeah, let's use the YouTube video. It has the translation here.
Partita per mai più non tornare no sei persi altra cosa appoggio nella sicura più profonda a rivedere le stelle se ciò negherà mio destino rimarrò teco in compagnia
So by the way, this little section where for some reason the translation didn't come through, he says, "O God of earth, O God of sky, O sun, O God," there at the end, and you can really kind of hear that sort of lament that he's singing through the end of it. So that's a recitative where it doesn't have that steady rhythm. It just kind of flows almost like he's talking to himself, and really for the benefit of the audience, telling us what his plan is, what he's feeling there. And I think Monteverdi does a beautiful job of getting that kind of sadness across and that desperation that Orpheus is feeling there. So we're also going to listen to an aria, and I will tell you that this is probably my favorite piece that we're going to listen to in this class. It's definitely my favorite piece of Baroque music, and it's in my top 5 favorite pieces of all time. Beautiful, beautiful piece of music, written by the English composer Henry Purcell. Or Purcell, it's English. So Henry Purcell composed during the mid to late part of the 17th century, again, an early Baroque composer, very, very highly regarded as an English composer, and he's actually buried beneath the organ in Westminster Abbey, so a very prominent and important, prestigious place to be buried as an English composer. So the piece we're going to listen to is Dido and Aeneas. It's from the opera Dido and Aeneas. It's called Dido's Lament, and it's actually made up of 2 pieces, When I Am Laid in Earth and Thy Hand Belinda. That's backwards. It starts with Thy Hand Belinda and then goes into When I Am Laid in Earth. And this piece uses an idea called a ground bass. And Purcell uses this ground bass to really drive in the emotion of this tune. So the way the ground bass works is that we have this bass line happening in the strings that continues on through the entire piece. And it does that line over and over and over again, with the melodies and the chords above it subtly changing every time. So you have that bass line that's very repetitive, but it doesn't sound repetitive because of the other stuff that's happening over the top of it. So that ground bass is what really gives this the emotion that we need here. And I want to kind of explain a little bit without giving just a whole bunch away in the opera, but basically what's happening here is that Dido has realized that she has made a huge mistake and has lost the love of her life forever, and he has been exiled. And so she was having an affair with this warrior and all this, who was Aeneas. And eventually everything kind of comes to light, and he gets banished from where they live, and she has this huge breakdown here at the end where she realizes that it's all her fault and that he's going to live in exile for the rest of his life because of her. And on top of that, she's lost the love of her life. So she's very, very sad, and she takes comfort in her handmaiden, Belinda, and then she sings her final song basically saying, whenever I'm gone, don't be sad for me, basically, when I'm gone. Remember me, but forget my fate. So forget this horrible part of my life. And then at the end, she kills herself at the end of the piece. This is the very end of the opera. And there's different variations of it depending on sometimes the budget of the opera company. In some of the more elaborate performances, she creates a fire and throws herself into the fire at the end of it. In some of them, she just drinks poison. I've seen some where she stabs herself at the end of it. But this is a beautiful piece of music that's very popular for college students to sing as part of their senior recitals. And every time I know that somebody's singing it, I try to go and listen because I absolutely love this piece of music. So we'll watch the YouTube video so you get a little bit of the drama with it. So this is Dido and Aeneas, Dido's Lament from Dido and Aeneas. That's not the video I want. I like that one because it does show the music, but let me find one that actually has where we can see the actor performing. Sorry, I thought that's the one I had linked. So there she's drunk the poison, and now she's going to sing her song and die. Bass line starting over again. So the end of it is the choir of angels comes out and carries her off. So beautiful, beautiful piece of music, easily my favorite of the Baroque era. And one of the cool things about it is that it's in English, so it's an opera that we can listen to and understand without having to have a translation. Okay, I want to end today by talking about Vivaldi, who is another very popular composer during this time period. Not an opera composer. He wrote a lot of instrumental music, concerti grossi and solo concertos, and was a very popular musician during his time. He's one of these composers who was very well known, very famous during the Baroque era, and is also still recognized as one of the great composers. And his piece, The Four Seasons, is used all over the place. You hear it all the time. You will probably recognize it. It's used in commercials and TV shows and stuff all the time. So Vivaldi taught music at an orphanage in Venice, which is a really cool. He's really well known for this because not only was it just a job for him, but he took it very, very seriously, and he helped this orphanage a lot. So students, children who lived in orphanages during this time period had miserable lives. And pretty much when they aged out of the orphanage, their life was going to continue to be miserable unless somebody came along and helped them. They were very rarely educated at all. And they would usually end up working as servants somewhere if they were able to find a job at all. And what Vivaldi did is he came into this orphanage and created an orchestra and taught hundreds and hundreds of these orphan girls to play music. He helped them to become great musicians, and by all accounts, it was really his passion. He was an excellent teacher. And he really changed the lives of these children, these girls in this orphanage, and helped them to become musicians, so that by the time they got out of the orphanage, they had a skilled trade and could go on and work as musicians. And many of his students actually became famous musicians in their own right. So he really did a lot of great work outside of being a virtuosic violinist and performing and making a lot of money that way and making a lot of money as a composer. He really used it for the good of these girls at this orphanage. So he wrote about 450 concerti grossi and solo concertos. By the way, the plural of concerto grosso is concerti grossi. So it's not concerto grossos, it's concerti grossi. That just means he wrote a bunch of those. So one of his most famous pieces of work that became popular again in the 1940s and 50s with the advent of records is The Four Seasons, which is a concerto for violin and string orchestra. So we're going to listen to the first movement of this, La Primavera, which is spring. So the way it works, it is a 4-movement concerto, which each piece represents a season. Right, the 4 seasons. So it starts with spring. So this is a concerto for violin. The first movement we're going to listen to here is Allegro, so that's the tempo. It's fast. And it is in ritornello form. So if I ask you about the form of La Primavera, it is in ritornello form. Right, and here is a YouTube video of this being to pause it for a second. The way this piece is kind of structured is you have main spring theme that they started with, and then it's interjected by these other little sections that each represents some aspect of spring. So like that first one was supposed to be like bird songs, and there's one that's supposed to sound like a babbling brook or a stream. There's one that's supposed to sound like a thunderstorm coming in. So you get these different elements of springtime within this piece of music. So you can kind of imagine sitting by a ring and having the battle go on. Then we have the thunderstorm come in. Right, so that is La Primavera. Now that's probably a larger orchestra than would have actually been used in the Baroque era, but that is what that piece sounds like. But most of the time when you hear it in a modern setting, it is going to be played by a larger orchestra like that. Okay, that is where I wanted to get to today. So if you have any questions for me, I will stick around. We will finish up on Tuesday with Bach and Handel, and then your next exam will be next Thursday. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Stick around. Also, just a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. I released a new album you can find it on Apple Music and Spotify. If you search for Logan Jacob, the album is called Still, If Only for a Moment, and I'll show you what the album cover looks like. So if you search for it, you can find it. You probably saw an email from me with the link to it on Bandcamp, and if you want to, it is also on Google Play Music to stream for free, but on Bandcamp you can actually download the high quality MP3 files, and I have a bunch of codes so that if you want it and you don't want to have to actually buy it, I will be happy to send you one of those codes. Just shoot me an email and I can send you a download code for you to check it out. It's Weird Electronic Music, and this is find my hyperfollow page here. There it is. So this is what the album looks like, and there's links. You can just search for Logan.Jacob, Still, If Only for a Moment, on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, YouTube Music, whatever, and you'll find it there if you want to listen to it. It's weird electronic music, but it's that's what I do in my free time. Thank you guys for being here today, and I will see you on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.